Welcome to the Disrupt Your Career podcast, brought to you by Claire Harbour
and Antoine Tirard. We're passionate about helping everyone find fulfillment in their work life.
We believe that big, messy, uncharted career changes are inevitable, and it's up to you to decide.
Will you take control and disrupt, or allow yourself to be disrupted?
We wrote the book about it, and now we share here our conversations with other thinkers in this crucial area.
Settle down and get ready to listen to this dose of wisdom.
So on this episode of the Disrupt Your Career Author Chat, I'm delighted to be welcoming May Busch. She is the author of a book with a very long title, but a very short one-word summary, which is Visible: How to Advance Your Career Without Playing Politics, Selling Your Soul, or Working Yourself into the Ground. And I am as keen as I'm sure you, the audience, are to discover what May is going to be sharing with us. So May, thank you so much for joining me and welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much, Claire. I am delighted to be here.
So let's start with the obvious question. Why did you write this book and how did you write it?
I have written the book because I've seen so many dedicated, hardworking achievers who struggle to get ahead in their careers while they watch their less capable colleagues pass them by. And one of my values is fairness, and I want to even the playing field. And that's the main reason I wrote the book. And you know that saying, good guys finish last? Well, I want to live in a world where good people who are sincere, hardworking, they try to do the right thing always, and they care about other people. I want them to be the ones who finish first, not last. That's the world I want to live in. And when we look at the environment today, it's just harder than ever. There's a lot of uncertainty in the world, huge amount of change. We're all in a tense and fearful mode. And we even have this term called job hugging, where people are holding on to even jobs they don't really care for just to have a job. So it's a very glass half empty world. And I think that's why this book is especially timely. And the book takes all the lessons I've learned, mostly the hard way, in my own career, and now working with senior leaders as a coach and with mid-career professionals in my Career Mastery membership. And it's about helping those good, hardworking achievers advance in a way that's authentic without having to burn out or sell out. And in a way, I wrote this book as something that I wish I had had back in the day when I was coming up the ranks. Because my 24-year career from entry level to COO of Morgan Stanley Europe, it was a struggle. I was the first in my family to go into a business world. They're all doctors or academics, public servants. So I had to learn everything from the ground up. But the good news is I took good notes. And also I've seen it from all sides, from the person who's feeling unseen and invisible to the higher ups, to then finally becoming one of those senior people behind closed doors where decisions are made. And I just wanted to share what I've learned to support other people in their journey.
There's no better motivation than that of wishing you'd had this earlier on. Thank you. And I love the ultimate driver of fairness. That brings us to pretty interesting stuff. Now, you're a busy professional woman. You've got many calls on your time. We're always interested also in the process. You know, everybody goes about their creation of in a different way. What sort of methods and attitudes did you use to get yourself through the process of writing this book?
That is such an interesting question, Claire, and no one's ever asked me that. So I want to applaud you for this.
Well, we've written a book too, right? So we know the pain.
Yes. So in the very beginning, I thought this was going to be simple because I'd written a book about a decade ago, and it was a very thin book with just some of my ideas. And I thought, well, I'll just expand that book and bring it up to date. But the book that we now have, Visible, has just morphed itself. It became something new and different. So while I had the benefit of a few concepts to leverage, I also had a lot of frameworks from the original book that I had to let go of. So that was really challenging to do. It's harder to unlearn than to learn, they say. And sometimes it's harder to let go of parts of what you regard as your baby in favor of the new stuff. So what was really important for me to be able to write this book that we now have was, number one, as you point out, to carve out time to write, because I was at the time, and I still am, growing my business and running my business. So that is all thanks to this marvelous team that I have, who really I could trust to do a lot of that, so that I could carve out enough time on a consistent basis. But it was an hour here, maybe 2 hours there. It was not these big blocks of time. Then the second thing that was important on the how was to have people around me who both knew me and understood the art of what a book that would actually get read by people and help people, what that intersect looked like. And so these were people I could bounce ideas off of, I could pressure test. And that's frankly how I realized that a big chunk of what I thought I was going to put into the book had to be jettisoned, and then what needed to be added in. The third and final thing I want to add is I had to do a lot of work on the how in terms of managing my own mindset. I'm a recovering perfectionist, recovering micromanager. I think those two go together. It was very hard for me not to edit as I wrote, to not judge and say, oh, this is terrible, crinkle it up and throw it into the wastebasket, as the analogy goes, because I was actually typing into my laptop. But just getting rid of that doubt along the way, that was no easy feat. And again, having people around me and working on my inner game, which is one of the things I also teach in the book. I guess we teach what we need to learn. So those were the parts of the how that really came to the fore when I saw your question.
Great. Inner game beats them all. If you had to summarize the key concepts and messages of the book around fairness and how to be the one winning, what would you tell us? Without giving it all away, because obviously we want people to buy the book too. But enough that we're salivating, please.
Absolutely. And I want people to buy the book and read the book and then apply the lessons in the book.
Yes. Not one of those books that just sits on a shelf.
Absolutely, Claire. I'll just share 3 quick concepts or key messages. So number 1 is there is a third way to advance your career authentically, where you don't have to work harder and you don't have to play politics, because we're all taught to put your head down, work hard, do a great job, and you'll be recognized and rewarded. But that's really something that only works for the first couple of years of your career, and then it becomes a recipe for being invisible and pigeonholed in your current role. Then we're told, oh, well, you have to play the game. But that feels really slimy, exhausting, and just completely wrong. And my book shows you how to find that third way to advance on your own terms by developing the skills that will most move the needle for you in your career. So it's not a one size fits all. The second message is doing a great job at your job is not enough. You also have to demonstrate your potential to succeed at the next higher level. And this is what decision makers are looking for. Not just your performance, but your future potential. And that leads to the third big message, which is when senior leaders are looking at someone's potential, there are 3 main areas where they are looking. One is how you work with people. So that's how your relationships with stakeholders are, how you lead when you're working with others, how you communicate in a way that's influencing. Then the second piece is how you work on the business. And that's about thinking strategically, making good decisions, even when things are uncertain and changing, and creating new kinds of value. Then the third piece is how you work on yourself. That's about self-awareness and being able to self-manage. It's about building your presence and your profile, so a bit of personal branding, and also having a network that you can leverage and draw on for the good not only of your own career, but also of the organization and the team that you're in. And then the rest of the book shows what those skills are in those 3 areas that you need to potentially consider developing for yourself so that you can choose which ones of those skills are worth working on for you. And then there are actionable steps for developing all those skills. And by the end of the book, I want people to have clarity on what they need to do next, to advance their career. I want them to have confidence to carve their own path by developing themselves. And then I want them to have courage to take action.
Courage is always the ultimate decider, isn't it? Yes. Let's dig into a couple of case studies or stories that you think would really illustrate aptly what you've been talking about.
So the first story, I was just going to share two quick ones. One is how I came to understand this whole concept that doing great work is not enough. I was up for promotion. I had just moved into a new role about 6 months prior. I was doing really well. My boss and her boss, they thought I was doing such a great job. They were surprised, but really happy. So they decide to put me up for promotion. But then I didn't get that promotion. They had to come to me and say, May, we really went to bat for you. But when we got in front of the senior executives, the committee that makes all the decisions, their response was most of them didn't even know who you were. It was, May who? And that was the mic drop moment. That was the wake-up call moment for me, where I realized that doing a great job isn't enough. In fact, having my boss and my boss's boss back me, that still wasn't enough. I needed to be visible to all the others as well who are decision makers, which then leads to the second story, which is about stakeholders. And at this point, I had managed to get that promotion. They transferred me to London, where I knew no one. My mission that was given to me was to go and win over the investment banking teams. And that's what I did. I spent all my time focusing on that. But then about 6 months in, my boss says, May, the sales and trading people are wondering what you're doing and whether we should ship you back to New York, because they haven't seen anything of value that you have done. So that was another wake-up call that you really need to look broadly at your stakeholder set and not just focus on what you've been asked to do, which I was doing to a high standard.
Yep.
And it was just the problem with ignoring the 13th fairy, you know, that Sleeping Beauty story, Grimm's fairy tale,
Yes.
where the 13th fairy does not get invited to the christening. And she barges into the party and puts a spell on Sleeping Beauty. So I had ignored the equivalent of the 13th fairy. And fortunately, I was able to overcome that. But the bottom line is you really want to be thinking broadly about who are those stakeholders and start building those relationships in an intentional way.
Those are very resonant examples that I think most people will either recognize from their own paths or anticipate recognizing perhaps with better preparation, thanks to your reminder on this point. And obviously, you've got a book full of tools and techniques for mitigating against this kind of not so great outcome as people go forward. So thank you so much for sharing those. I think we could go on for hours. There's obviously a wealth of stories behind here, but this is supposed to be a short podcast that incites people to buy. So let's leave it for today, May. Thank you so much. It's been fascinating, and obviously the audience will be able to click and buy and increase their strength and confidence in the way they manage their career in an authentic way. So thank you so much for sharing with us.
You're welcome, and thank you, Claire.
We hope you enjoyed hearing from this month's guest as much as we did.
Do go and check out our work on disrupt-your-career.com and come back soon. Thank you.